안녕하세요. Hello and welcome to this first of 4 lectures on the photo exhibit MEGA SEOUL 4DECADES, taking place at the Korean Cultural Center in Ottawa in collaboration with the Faculty of Liberal Arts at the Brantford campus of Wilfrid Laurier University and the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in Ottawa. I am Dr. Christina Han, Associate Professor of History at Laurier Brantford. On the top here, you see my campus. That's the building where my office is located, although I am recording this video from home. On the bottom, you see the entrance of the Korean Cultural Center in Ottawa, where the actual physical exhibit is taking place right now. It is my great delight to meet you and share with you my thoughts on this amazing exhibit that showcases the works of some of the most celebrated photographers in South Korea, the photographs that show us the changing faces of Seoul in the past 4 decades. This exhibit was originally created by the Museum of Photography in Seoul in 2012, and since then has been traveling all over the world, first in the Philippines, then in Vietnam, Hong Kong, Belgium, and now in Canada. I don't know how many of you have been to South Korea and its capital city, Seoul. If you have not yet done so, I suggest that you book your next vacation there, or at least include a visit to Korea on your bucket list. It's a place of rich history, vibrant culture, and new and exciting developments. Many of my friends and students from Canada who are not ethnically Korean are now living and working in Korea and adopted Korea as their second home, including Jennifer Scott, whom you see in this photo on the left, who was a student of mine at Laurier Brantford a few years ago. After graduating, Jennifer went to Korea because it's been her dream to travel there, work there, and live there. And this is Jennifer with her friend, Tracy Wong, another student of mine from Laurier Brantford, visiting a royal palace in Seoul, all dressed up in traditional costume called hanbok. And Jennifer looks really happy in this photo. And this is Jennifer right now. She's working as a teacher in Seoul. She just sent me this photo last week. I told her that I'll be giving this lecture and asked her if I could share some of her photos with the audience, and she was thrilled and sent me this photo right away. Jennifer and her class doing a field trip to a museum. But I'm not here today to tell you to move to Korea or speak only about great things about its capital, Seoul. In fact, the exhibit and my 4 lectures will touch upon not so glamorous past of Korea, including the war, military dictatorship, and rapid industrialization and urbanization, and their impact on the lives of South Koreans in the past 4 decades. The photos showcased in the exhibit capture various scenes of everyday life in Seoul, a city on the other side of the globe that in many ways is very different from the cities in Canada that we are familiar with. But at the same time, as we will see, the photos from Seoul's past also shed light on the concerns and experiences that are shared globally, such as modernization, what it means, and how it came about, often in the Western and capitalist form, industrialization, and its impact on the environment, as well as the social and personal costs of economic success. Urbanization and its impact on society and human relationships. And finally, the future of globalization and globalized humanity, where our societies are heading to, and how cities, rapidly expanding cities throughout the world, shape human lives everywhere. Moreover, we'll explore how photography as an art form conveys universal aesthetic experiences and expressions, which we can appreciate whether we have actually been to Seoul or not. Although having the actual knowledge of the place captured in the photographs, as well as the knowledge of the artists who have created these works, will help us better understand these artworks. And that is precisely what I am here to do, to provide historical, cultural, and artistic context so you can engage with these artworks by celebrated photographers from Korea. Now, before we delve into Seoul's past, let's start with an examination of where Seoul is at now. What kind of city is Seoul? Here are some general facts about the city. Let's start with the name. What does Seoul mean? Do you know? What does Seoul mean? Seoul literally means capital in Korean. So the capital of South Korea is capital. We could also say Canada's Seoul is Ottawa. The city's official name is Seoul Special Metropolitan City. And here is a map of Seoul. The river that runs across Seoul is the Han River. Yes, spelled just like my last name, H-A-N, the Han River. Now let's look at the size of Seoul. In terms of its physical space, Seoul's size is 605.2 square kilometers. For comparison, Toronto's size is 630.2 square kilometers. That is to say, Toronto is slightly bigger than Seoul in its physical size. However, South Korea is a small country. Only 100,210 square kilometers. As a point of reference, the size of Ontario, the province of Ontario, is 917,441 square kilometers. That is to say, the province of Ontario is 9 times the size of entire South Korea. But when it comes to population, South Korea has more people than Canada. The population of Canada in 2019 was 37.59 million. In 2019, South Korea's population was 51.71 million. Can you imagine all that people living in this space, only 1/9 the size of Ontario? Seoul became a megacity in 1988. A megacity is a city with a population of over 10 million people. Seoul's population peaked in 1990 and has since declined a bit. In 2021, which is this year, Seoul is the world's 33rd largest city in population. And I'll get this right, 9.967,677 people. How many megacities are there in Canada? The answer? None. There is no mega city in Canada yet. Currently, there are 37 mega cities in the world, and Seoul is considered to be one of them, although the population kind of dipped slightly under 10 million, but it's very, very close. Population of Toronto is around 3 million now. So for Toronto to become a mega city, it has a long way to go. The Seoul metropolitan area, which includes cities around Seoul, as we can see on this map here, Seoul is this beige color, and Seoul metropolitan area includes these nearby cities. So this area has a population, or had 25.6 million people living there in 2017. And was ranked as the 5th largest metropolitan area in the world in 2017. In comparison, the Greater Toronto Area has 6.2 million people. And connecting the Seoul metropolitan area is its amazing subway system. This is the subway map of Seoul. Would you like to try? It's amazing. It's great. I highly recommend that you hop on the subway when you visit Seoul. All this means is that Seoul is a densely populated city with a population density of 15,900 residents per square kilometer. In comparison, Toronto's population density is 1,049 residents per square kilometer. So take one Torontonian and multiply by 15. That's what you will see in Seoul. Now let's talk about the location of Seoul. Seoul is located in the northern part of South Korea. It is in fact very close to North Korea, only 24 kilometers from the demilitarized zone and 50 kilometers from the border with North Korea. Isn't that dangerous? Why did South Korea decide to make Seoul its capital when it's so close to the North Korean border? Well, this has to do with history. Seoul was the location of capital throughout Korea's history, and we'll look at Seoul's history very shortly. Now to geography of Seoul. One thing that surprises visitors to Seoul is that there are mountains everywhere in Seoul. There are mountains everywhere. Seoul is located on the Han River Plain, but is bordered by 6 big mountains and 16 smaller mountains. So literally, there are mountains everywhere. In fact, the whole of the Korean peninsula is very mountainous, and 64% of South Korea is covered in forest. 64% covered in forest. Keep in mind that after the Korean War in 1953, most mountains were bare. The Koreans worked hard for many years to plant and grow trees. Mountains are something that I personally appreciate about Korea and Seoul. I was born and raised in Seoul, and my family immigrated to Canada in 1994. And I remember as a child, almost every school field trip, we went to some kind of mountain. And I used to complain about it all the time. But after moving to Ontario, to Toronto, or the Ontario being really flat, I realized how much I really miss the mountains. So here we have the map that shows where the mountains are throughout the city of Seoul. But despite its rather small landmass, South Korea is the 3rd largest exporter in Asia, that is after China and Japan, and the 8th largest exporter in the world. South Korea has one of the biggest economies in the world with a GDP of $1.6 trillion. South Korea's GDP per capita is the 10th largest in the world. Canada, by the way, is number 9. South Korea, number 10. We're very close. Seoul generates over 20% of South Korea's GDP. Seoul also is the home of the headquarters of many South Korean companies that you might know, like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, and Kia. And in the past decade, with the rise of the Korean wave globally, Seoul also became the center of entertainment, fashion, and music, not only in the region, but also internationally. Back when I was in high school in Toronto, I never would have imagined that one day high school kids in Canada would be listening to Korean pop songs and watch Korean dramas. Every year, I am surprised to find how many undergraduate students, like Jennifer, that you met earlier, even the ones from small towns, grew up consuming Korean pop culture. Like, surely times have changed. It is true that images of South Korea and Seoul represented in popular media tend to be very polished and highly commercialized, nicely packaged for global consumption. Like this one tourism poster featuring South Korean idol group BTS. The poster says, see you in Seoul. Well, while BTS says, see you in Seoul, I could guarantee you, when you go to Seoul, BTS won't be greeting you unless you are someone really, really special. And I'm sure you all are. And Seoul is much more than its iconic sites, like this former royal palace visited by many, many tourists. And I'm sure we all know this. If you have been to Ottawa or if you live in Ottawa, you know that not every corner of Ottawa looks like the Parliament Hill or the Rideau Canal. And it takes time to truly experience a city. I now live in Brantford, and it took me a while, a few years, to truly understand and appreciate the city's rich history and culture. And here we have an old postcard of Brantford that shows its Colborne Street, which is very close to where our campus is located. Big cities are important for their countries, like what Paris is for France, London for UK, and New York City for the United States, and Seoul for South Korea. As social, political, and cultural centers of these countries, these cities I mentioned created their own unique cultures that in many ways reflect the country's unique history. That is to say, the history of Seoul was closely intertwined with the history of Korea throughout time. As Patrick Geddes, a Scottish intellectual who was a pioneer in modern urban planning, said, quote, "A city is more than a place in space. It is a drama in time." End of quote. How true is that? So now that we somehow understand Seoul as a place in space, let's now turn to look at Seoul as a drama in time. How did Seoul become what it is today, the city that it is today? History of Seoul through time. This is going to be a crash course on Korean history, covering like 6,000 years in roughly 10 minutes. So let's get ready. Archaeological evidence suggests that early people settled in the Han River plain around 4000 BCE. That was a long time ago. Bronze Age artifacts and tombs were found along the river. And one of these examples is Amsadong prehistoric site, which you see on this map on the right. That's the blue label right there. That's where this prehistoric site is located, which you can visit when you go to Seoul. And these artifacts were found in that particular site. And when you visit the site, you will find these reconstructed prehistoric residences. Eventually, these early settlements grew and became a city. Now, global history. What is a city? Why do humans build cities? What do cities tell us? Cities are really important in human history. As a species, humans have been builders, city builders. The first cities appear to have originated in Mesopotamia around year 3000 BCE. And these cities became the basis of river valley civilizations around the world, including Egypt, Mediterranean, India, and China. And this map highlights where these early river valley civilizations were located. Why river? Why the rivers? Access to fresh water was really important for these early civilizations. It was one of the key conditions for building the cities. And we see that also in Korea as well, the Han River and Seoul. So why do humans build cities? Apparently, we love to live together with other humans. That's why. For protection, for access to more resources, better opportunities. Cities became centers of civilizations, innovation, and culture. But cities and urbanization also led to the creation of hierarchical society and complex political system. Why? Because in order for tens of or hundreds of thousands of people to live together, there had to be some kind of power structure, right? There had to be some kind of power structure that determined who the rulers were and who the subjects were. In other words, cities marked the beginning of inequality, patriarchy, and warfare. And we see this in this mural from Assyria, right? Assyrian war machine. And cities, even to this day, represent progress, wealth, and culture, but also inequality, power, and political tensions. During the Three Kingdoms period, which lasted from 86 BCE to 660 CE, the three Korean kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, struggled to secure the areas around the Han River because of its strategic importance. The river runs right across the peninsula. One of the kingdoms, Baekje, set up a capital in the present-day Seoul area for about 500 years. And then the city was taken by Goguryeo and then by Silla. The three Korean kingdoms developed their unique cultures, as we can see in this painting that shows their different costumes. They dress differently. I guess they wanted to dress differently. That is why in Seoul, we find archaeological remains of all three kingdoms, especially Baekje, such as this ancient tomb in Seokcheon-dong, belonging to the kingdom of Baekje. It's gigantic, it's beautiful. And if you're interested in archaeology, you can visit Seoul Baekje Museum next time you're in Seoul. Achasan Mountain, which is one of the big mountains marked with the red dot on the right side of the map here. Achasan Mountain, which I visited a lot as a child because my family lived right at the foot of the mountain, has remains of a fort built by Goguryeo. And this is what it looks like. And on the right, you see some articles excavated from the site. And Goguryeo was known for its strong military with its metal-plated armor. I'm just throwing it in there just in case you're interested in military history. Eventually, the kingdom of Silla conquers the two other kingdoms and unifies the peninsula. Now moving really fast, Silla eventually fell and a new dynasty, the Goryeo dynasty, was established. The dynasty lasted from 898 to 1392, and this is the dynasty where the English name Korea came from. Goryeo, Korea. Yes, this is an important dynasty. Well, it was an important dynasty. The capital of Goryeo was present-day Kaesong in North Korea. But Seoul was designated as its southern capital during certain years of the dynasty. Goryeo developed a highly sophisticated Buddhist culture and also aristocratic society. It suffered Mongol invasion in the 13th century when much of the world was being conquered by the Mongols led by Genghis Khan. And Goryeo was overthrown by one of its military generals who established a new dynasty called the Joseon dynasty. Joseon lasted for 500 years. And Seoul was its capital. And Seoul at the time was called Hanyang. And this is the map of Hanyang around year 1800. Notice all the mountains surrounding the city. Hanyang was considered to be an auspicious site based on geomancy, also known as feng shui in Chinese, because it was believed that mountains would function as screens that would help qi, right, the vital force or energy, to gather there. And that's why Joseon Dynasty built its capital right there in present-day Seoul. Joseon adopted Confucianism as its governing ideology and developed a vibrant culture. When you visit Seoul, you can see palaces, temples, schools, and houses from this dynasty. Seoul was Joseon's political, social, and cultural center for over 500 years. Donggwoldo, a painting of East Palace in Hanyang, is the painting that you're looking at right now. It looks really gorgeous. This is a giant 16-panel folding screen, which actually happens to be on display at the Korean Cultural Center in Ottawa right now. Now moving on, towards the end of the dynasty, the 19th century, times were changing rapidly, especially under the threat of Western imperialism. The Joseon dynasty attempted modernizing efforts, and Joseon's last king, King Gojong, declared the dynasty was now a modern state called the Korean Empire. And here are two portraits of Gojong, the one on the right in his traditional royal robe. The one on the left shows Gojong as a modern monarch. Take a look at these photos of Seoul from that time period. Hanyang, 1890. We see, on the left, we see what Seoul looked like, the central area during this time. And on the right, you see this lovely portrait of a Korean family. A modern bridge, Han River Bridge, opened in 1900, and you see the photo right there on the left. And streetcars were also introduced in Seoul, 1903. But the Korean Empire was short-lived, and it ended when Japan colonized Korea in 1910. Japan's colonial rule of Korea lasted 35 years. It was brutal and exploitative. In this lecture, I don't have time to go into detail, but yeah, the Japanese called Seoul Keijo and transformed the city based on the ideas of colonial modernity to advance Japan's political and economic interests. Here's a postcard picture of downtown Seoul from the time period. Notice the Western-style buildings. The large building on the left in the postcard was the Central Bank of Colonial Korea, set up by the Japanese administration. The Japanese colonial rule of Korea ended in 1945 when Japan was defeated in World War II, and Korea gained independence. But rather than returning sovereignty to the Korean people, US and USSR decided to divide the peninsula in half into North and South Korea along the 30th parallel. And they imposed trusteeship on North and South Korea. And Koreans protested. They were enraged. But this was the time of the Cold War. Division eventually led to the Korean War, which started in 1950. When the North invaded the South. What started as a civil war quickly became a global war involving 21 countries, one of them being Canada. The Korean War was a relatively short war, lasted 3 years, but it was exceptionally bloody. Nearly 5 million people died. And more than half of these casualties were civilians, which was about 10% of Korea's population at the time. This rate of civilian casualties was higher than World War II's and the Vietnam Wars. And this photo shows Canadian soldiers in Korea at the time, fighting for South Korea. And this lovely photo shows a young Canadian soldier and an old Korean man. They both look really tired, maybe from the war, and this photo beautifully captures it. During the Korean War, North Korean troops occupied Seoul, and this is what Seoul looked like. The city was evacuated and destroyed and left as a depopulated ruin by the time the war ended in 1953. Another photo that shows the destruction of the city of Seoul. And when the war finally ended, in stalemate, people of South Korea quickly got to work to rebuild the country and its capital, Seoul. And here we have a photo of people trying to rebuild the city of Seoul again. And another photo that shows the reconstruction effort. A photo from 1957 shows that people were still living in these tents. This was 4 years after the end of the war. And the road ahead for South Korea was not a smooth one. Sure, South Korea developed and saw rapid industrialization and modernization, beginning in the 1960s. But this was done mostly under military dictatorship. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, all the way to the 1980s. Yes, over 30 years of military dictatorship. And South Koreans fought hard, long and hard for democracy. The Gwangju Uprising was a popular uprising in the city of Gwangju against the military regime, first led by students, then joined by other civilians. It is estimated that around 600 people were killed in the span of 10 days. In the 1960s and 70s, South Korea was transformed into a developmental state, which saw state-led macroeconomic planning for rapid economic growth, and human rights were often violated. Sure, South Korea became a shining example of East Asian economic miracle, but the people of South Korea, as I said, fought long and hard for true democracy, and they suffered tremendously. And finally, in 1993, the first civilian president was elected. That was not long ago, 1993. South Korea experienced a breathtaking transformation in the past half century, and this is what Seoul looks like today. At Laurier Brantford, our history program where I teach, we have People Make History lecture series where we invite participants and witnesses of great historical events to come and share their stories. In 2018, we invited 3 Korean War veterans from Ontario. They shared their experiences of Korea and the war, and their experiences of returning to Korea in 2017 for the first time since the war, when the government of South Korea invited Canadian veterans to come and visit the country again. One of the 3 veterans, the man in the middle in this photo, said that when he got off the plane at the Incheon International Airport, he thought they were stopping over at a different country. He thought they were stopping over a different country because he just couldn't believe that this was Korea. And when he was told that, hey, you're in South Korea, he was utterly shocked because the country he remembered had only ruins, had nothing but ruins and war refugees and orphans. And he was just totally blown away throughout his entire trip in South Korea. To many Canadians, South Korea might be a country of tech giants like Samsung, LG, and car companies like Hyundai and Kia. or a home of consumer products, fashion, cosmetics, and popular entertainers like BTS. But the photographs featured in this exhibit, MEGA SEOUL 4DECADES, show images of Seoul and South Korea that are not often seen by the outside world. These include images of everyday life and everyday spaces of ordinary South Koreans in the past 4 decades. In the next video, we'll talk about documentary photography, what it is, and how to appreciate it, as well as a brief history of photography and documentary photography in Korea. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again in the next lecture.